Oh, I did not even finish what I mean, that's what I like about, yeah, well, that's a style of teaching that I appreciate a lot. There's a funny story. A good teaching day always starts with funny stories. So that, here we go. But there's the American monk, Ajahn Sumedho. There's a story that at the beginning, he was training with Ajahn Chah, the great Thai monk teacher. And gradually, bit by bit, his Thai was becoming a bit better and he had some meditative understanding. And so one morning, he was told that he was teaching that evening, which is, that's where you have regularly all the lay people coming to the monastery, and then he was supposed to teach in Thai. And that scared the living daylights out of him. And so he spent the whole day preparing a very intricate exposition on how the different unwholesome emotions relate to the various cosmological realms. And so he started to talk and talk and talk, and was feeling pretty good about himself. And then he stopped, and then everyone was very impressed with his Thai. And so he thought, okay, that went well. And then he walked past his own teacher, and his own teacher looked at him and said, and that you never, ever do again. Speak from your heart, never do that. Yeah. And I'd always try to find like a middle ground. So on the one hand, the Tibetans tend to always teach text. Yeah, so for them, continuity over textual transmission is important. But when you just teach text, it becomes academic. Then that's what you do. But that you could have gotten yourself any lecturer, any professor to teach you the intricate details of Prasangika philosophy, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I always try to find a middle ground, like what am I looking at, but what am I looking at in relationship to you? So when you're in the morning session, I meet the people online, and then, well, something follows from it, which I don't know either. So I had some global ideas because, of course, it needs to go somewhere across a year. I have no fixed ideas what that morning is going to be. And so my backup idea was to talk about the disadvantage of self-cherishing. But for those that were there, I know you know that I did not get there anywhere close. And so then to have like something like the Dharma unfolding by itself, it just happens. That I like a lot. So I could talk alone about all the things that I did not discuss this morning. That would be a place to start, but maybe let's not do that. No. Yeah. One caveat to say is that we took Mahāmudrā as a topic because, well, that's a very popular topic. At the same time, realistic it is also to say that doing Mahāmudrā is exceedingly difficult. So it is not a beginner's topic. Now, there is worth in just trying it, playing with it. Yeah. At the same time, we also have to be realistic what we can do with it. So I will give you some things to play with, but it's not going to be the full-blown Mahāmudrā, because then I would lose you like within 5 minutes of the meditation. Like I have no idea where you are anymore, and that would be not profitable. Yeah. So there is benefit. Good morning. There is benefit of having tasters of what is at the far end, but also being realistic that we might not be entirely there yet. This is an extremely advanced practice. Yeah. At the same time, that is also something that is really worth our while to consider for a moment, is that amongst Westerners, we are so, that's not our fault. Every culture has its own constructions, of which some things are helpful and other things are not. And there's benefits and disadvantages to what we do. It's not a judgmental argument, but we are very goal-oriented. So the idea is you like what I heard about yesterday, and the guy that we talked to in front of the gates of hell, and like you have a vision of where you want to go to, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And we tend to impose the same thing on the Dharma. So His Holiness even always complains, like when I give an initiation, the room is full, but when I want to explain ethics, then, well, there's two people listening to me. Yeah. And he's very correct in highlighting that this is actually quite unfortunate. So you see even Tibetans falling into this trap. So when you announce teachings on Dzogchen or Mahāmudrā or highest Yoga Tantra, then the room fills up. But if you talk about the basics of the path, then yeah, the numbers are significantly lower. Yeah. And that is actually not very practical in two different ways. That is interesting to consider. That's that one could say on the one hand, these advanced practices consist of all the smaller practices. Hey, it's not that you have bricks and houses. Houses consist of, well, lots of bricks. And so if you want to build a house from scratch, you first learn how to make bricks. Because without knowing how to do that or how to make a beam and so on and so forth, there is no sense of making a house at all. And so building a house consists also of knowing what bricks are and how bricks are made. And so the small practices are related to the larger practices as well. And so to do the small thing is already to do a little bit of the big thing. It will empty into the big thing. Yeah. But secondly, if I would start from scratch to want to build a house, that would be quite frustrating. I would probably give up very quickly. I would build something, and within no time, that little wall that I built falls over, because I might not know how exactly to do that. Yeah. And so that is the great advantage. If we focus on that, then we very quickly stop practicing, because our practice doesn't go anywhere, because we can't do that. Well, on the other hand, what we then completely overlook is the enormous transformative effects of in this case, I would say meditative brick making, because that is where we are. And so the effects of these practices on our mind can be substantial. And I would almost say, like, if you know how to make bricks, you know half of what it means to build a house. And the rest is details, then how to stack them. But the brick explains why walls keep up. So if you know how to make good bricks, then how to stack them is a further detail. But having learned how to make bricks is much of your understanding. And so when you look at the liberative aspects of different aspects of the Dharma, the main great liberative aspects are at the beginning of the book. And the great practices at the end are sort of the sweeping up of what is left over. And that's very important to understand. So enormous transformative effects can be had from really beginner's practices. And understanding yourself to be impermanent, for example, I can't tell you how transformative, how world-changing that actually is when you see that for yourself. When you see that there's not a moment of you that stays the same, that there is no you moving through time, for example. So if you can see that, as my own teacher said, then if you can realize impermanence, then emptiness is an arm's length away. Then you're almost to the end. Yeah. But it takes quite a bit of effort to get that first stretch right, to see that one is impermanent. That's quite a challenging proposition. Yeah. And so what I'm going to play with is many small things, and to see if we can somehow then have a feeling of, we do a bit of brick making here and there, and then we see if we can get a sense of what building a house means. Does it make sense? Yeah. So I don't want to overburden today with too much theory, but we need some of it here and there. Yeah. So we're going to start with a little refuge practice again, but and there will be normally lots to explain there, but I would take it from a felt sense. Is that we're going to visualize the Buddha in front of us, a little reflection about what is the Buddha, as we did yesterday evening. But then we're going to do two things. On the one hand, we're going to focus for a moment on the fact that we experience the activities of our own body, speech, and mind as pretty restricted. They often behave in less fortunate ways. Let's be positive about it. Yeah. And that is a burden to us. And the burden is that we impose things on the world that are not in there. And it has a lot to do with our incessant talking, with our conceptualization. And we make everything look disconnected. That is where this day is going. And we experience a world of things separated from each other. Yeah. And so I'm going to invite you to for a moment to sense that the challenge that you feel with regard to your own body, the activities of your own body, speech, and mind, and to contemplate for a moment how often we regret what came out of our mouths, and how difficult it can be what your mind is doing to you, and the same thing with regard to the body, and just not as a judgmental way, but just to feel that burden. And to understand that burden comes from our incessant chattering. Yeah. It makes everything secondhand. It blinds us to the world as in front of our noses. And then to imagine that from the Buddha in front of us, light rays come. And we try to imagine what it would feel like to be alleviated from these burdens. Yeah. And then towards the end, we're going to visualize that the Buddha then dissolves and enters us, and his mind mingles with ours. And for a moment, we have a completely non-conceptual awareness that has no internal structure. It's just openness, one could say. And for a moment, just to relax in that openness. Yeah. And when things come through, to know that what is coming through is equally simply open. These are appearances, like clouds moving through the sky, but we remain nicely sky for a while. Does it make some sense? Yeah. You will notice that especially in context of Mahāmudrā, the felt sense matters a lot. Yeah. The felt sense in the end is always a felt sense of release, of learning to let go, to feel the burden, the pressure on us, and then either to imagine or to find a way to help the mind have moments of release. Like, what does it do to me when I let go, when it eases up? So let's start with a comfortable position. Yeah. And sitting in a comfortable position is very much related to where we want to go to. So that when we observe the content of our perception, we very quickly realize there's a burden on that perception. Some things attract our attention in negative ways. Some things attract our attention in desiring ways. Some other things we'd love to observe, but they keep escaping us. And it's not the fault of what appears to us, but it is the fault of the way it appears to us. And there is an easy solution to this that the Buddha once gave to a person called Bahya. Learning to leave things alone. To know, for example, what is heard, but to actively liberate the what is heard from either wanting or not wanting that sound. And to appreciate the magic that you can actually do that. And that when you truly don't mind the sound in either way, you find immediate freedom. You become free to choose either to pay or not to pay attention to it. Setting the sound free is to set yourself free. So take a moment for yourself to explore that with regard to your other senses. And focus specifically on how it feels to let go. That you may have that personal experience with what the Buddha means with abiding peacefully in the here and now. But the more you can notice that in doing so, the mind immediately equally deepens. Becomes more quiet. Now we can do the same thing with the body. Moving with our attention to the body, deliberately setting it free from all our judgments. Noticing how appreciative acknowledgement instead allows the body to relax. Which in turn allows us to inhabit the body rather than living in the upper attic of the brain. And finally, we can do this with the mind itself. Simply being aware of it, noticing that it might be excited, or dull, or simply clear. It might be pleasant or unpleasant feelings. You might see to your surprise when you look at the mind with an appreciative awareness, not wanting it to be different, but also the mind calms quite naturally on its own accord. It shows you that meditation is much more a practice of looking than it is of doing. That when we look at the world outside and inside, equanimously, free of judgment and kind, they relax. We come to abide happily in the here and now. I don't really can imagine what hopefully will be one day truly the case. That rather than visualizing the Buddha in front of us, when we really calm, we simply notice his presence. We are always held by the compassionate, omniscient mind. He's always trying to get seen. But our minds are most of the time too busy to notice. But now we do. Like he was sitting there all alone. If you're unfamiliar with this type of practice, feel free to imagine the Buddha in any way you want. for He's manifesting for your sake. And if you are familiar, then it's worth your while to visualize Him on a lion throne, lotus, moon, and sun disk, in His monastic attire, but in both cases, it's helpful to visualize that this is simply a manifestation of wisdom and compassion. Free of all normativity, happy to be seen and to see us. He doesn't want our blind belief or devotion. Rather, we can imagine that by simply looking at Him, we understand His teachings, we understand the Dharma, for He has overcome all the cognitive problems that we know all too well. That we have come together here to overcome them. We can feel His kindness, and we can feel His gratitude. For free of all burdens, and filled with all qualities. He finds the freedom to serve all beings. That he managed to do so out of so much love is worthy, truly worthy of our homage. Above all, because it tells us something about ourselves. To lift up our hearts and minds, we can visualize conjuring up magnificent offerings. Maybe we can visualize that we fashion them out of our own good qualities, out of our own wisdom, compassion, generosity. Molding our virtue into flowers and foodstuffs, incense, medicine, whatever pleases and satisfies the senses, heals bodies, supports practice. Knowing that Buddhas only use it to serve others. We can do that in not only in some abstract way. We can imagine that we smell the flowers. And so on. Then, as the Buddha holds no judgment, we can relieve the burden of our hearts. By openly expressing what has gone wrong in the past. That his presence informs us that in the absence of the past, there's no reason to hold on to it, neither to feel guilty. But to be encouraged to learn from it. To use our mistakes to discover the gateways to awakening. Lift up the burden of our negative bias. We can take a moment to rejoice in all that is done by both living beings and Buddhas. That brings happiness to others. Every living being does so. We can generate after that the intent not to forget him again. The Buddha is the best of friends. reminding us of our true nature that we all too often forget. To generate the intent to stay filled with his teachings. We may deepen our understanding in our direct experience. And we can imagine that as a response, beautiful white light radiates from his forehead and enters ours. Like a healing nectar or balm. Feel it as it fills the body, liberating it from its burdens. Making it feel light and buoyant. Then red light shines from his throat and enters ours, filling again our being. Lifting the burden of all the unfortunate speech of the past and its restrictions in the present. And finally, blue light radiates from his heart and enters ours. Lifting the burden of all unskillful thoughts. All alienation and zero-sum games. But also our mind feels fresh and bright. And we can imagine that he dissolves into light, golden light. That enters us, and in which do we dissolve as well. As though our awareness dissolves into his. Letting go of all concepts, boundaries, structures. Simply becoming like the empty sky or open space. Calm and serene. Let's take 5 minutes to simply in silence rest here. Then from within that space, we can slowly rise for meditation. Now, important question would be here, like, is this make-believe? And if this is make-believe, why on earth am I doing that? There is a long-standing debate in the Tibetan tradition how much Tantra you need for this. But when we leave that debate to the side, then the answer is that it is never practiced entirely separated from Tantra. And one accessible way to approach it is that, put it in modern terms, that our perception anyway has what one could call a narrative structure. We are telling stories about the world. What we see is a story and not reality as it is. That is a chair is my story, or is our story, is a human story. Yeah, but when you bring your dog, you might not see a chair. You might see something to fight with. And so we do something to the world. We organize the world in a way that makes sense to us, but it is a story. But the Buddha highlights that many aspects of our stories are very unfortunate. They are a burden on the mind, especially the story about me. So of all the unrealistic stories that we tell, that's by far the worst one. Yeah. That has very little to do with the way we exist. And so, on the one hand, Buddha could say we use what is, with a nice technical term, we use deconstructive meditation. We try to show our own mind that some aspects of the story it conjures up are pretty unrealistic. They can't be that way. They don't make sense. And so that's very relieving. And that, to a very important sense, is liberating. But at the same time, what is also very useful to do is to learn to tell better stories, to learn actively to look at the world in novel ways that are much more informative. And it's surprising to see how these visualizations like these affect your psychology when you do them. It's important not to, the question is not whether or not this make-believe is true or not. The question is, what does it do when you do so? And that the physical, psychological effects of them are deeply noticeable. And when you become good at it, this light radiating from the Buddha, for example, really produces a very intense, or can produce a very intense felt sense that is really helpful and prepares your mind for a space where you can meditate without burdens. Of course, there's much to be had here for those that have some understanding of Tantra. I think for this moment that was quite enough. Yeah. But to highlight some of the aspects of it, how one could say that the burdens that we experience, we tell into existence. Yeah. And we are very unaware of the fact that we do so. All our hindrances are based on ignorance, and these ignorance are side effects of our conceptuality. So it is our constant telling that informs our world in rather unfortunate ways. Yeah. And that produces a constant burden, and you know that. You might have moments during this meditation when all of a sudden your mind was pretty calm, and then a thought jumps in. And that almost brings a moment of scare, like, what the heck? It upsets the entire system the moment it jumps in. You might have a moment of calm, happily sort of floating around, and then an obligation of this afternoon turns in, or your children are behaving in some way, or whatever your mind comes up with. The moment that thought jumps in, then the whole system gets upset. And so to actively play with that felt sense of that burden, and to visualize that the Buddha from whose side these burdens are absent, then helps you to let them go, because you can, because they're not helpful. They don't help your behavior, rather the opposite. To feel gradually empowered to be able to let them go, to be invited to let them go, is extremely helpful. There's much more to this than that, but the rest would take the rest of the day. No, it would take the rest of the next few months, to be honest. Yeah. Lifetime, maybe. No, they're not that complicated. Yeah, we make things complicated. And we say, no, the Dharma is not easy, it's not difficult. We are. Yeah. There's a famous saying, if this is, that is, if this is not, then that is not. And if you understand that sentence, you're enlightened. But then nothing happens. So we need the commentary, yeah. But the commentary is just an endless navigation around our nonsense, yeah. But if you really know that sentence, then everything else just follows from it, yeah. So in reality, no, it doesn't, yeah. But yeah, we do. We need lots of convincing. But anyway, so what I wanted to show is on the one hand, the importance of using these narrative structures, and to see what they do to you, and to have them have their validity verified by what they do to you, yeah, and to use them in that way, yeah. Again, there's much to be said, but for the moment that is okay. Well, I would like to focus a little bit on the 7-limb prayer that we do in the middle, yeah. That's what on the one hand, and I highlighted this yesterday evening for those that were here, yeah, is that when we pay homage to the qualities of the Buddha, it's not that the Buddha needs that. That would be, if that were the case, we should walk away very quickly. We need that list because it tells you something about who you are. The Buddhas are, and that plays a major role in the Mahāmudrā tradition, the Buddhas have the same nature. So in our case, this is called Buddha nature, or Buddha potential. And we are, and that is, we need to throw in a big word, we are empty of inherent existence, and so are Buddhas. We don't intrinsically exist, we exist extrinsically. We exist relatedly. And that is true for Buddhas, and that's true for us. There's one major distinction. Buddhas see that, and we do not. When we open our eyes, the world looks pretty self-existing. Like you are here, I am here. And there's like a vast space between us. Yeah. If you're British, you would like to keep it that way. I hope I insulted no one. Yeah. And when you climb up in the north, the further people seem to need distance. Yeah. And the Dutch people are already quite bad at that, but recently I was visiting Scandinavia, and then it's impressive how worse that is. And when you ask a French person how they experience Dutch people, they think like, well, they are pretty cold. And then when a Dutch person goes to Scandinavia, they think the same thing about Scandinavians. So with the climate, you know, the colder it becomes, which doesn't make any sense to begin with, the colder it becomes, the more distance we take. I think you should do the opposite. Yeah. When it's really cold, you should sit closer to each other. And when it gets really warm, you should sit further away from each other. But no, all across the world is exactly the opposite. Yeah, yeah. If you go to India, everyone is sitting on top of you. And if you sit in Holland, you know, they're sitting miles away from you. So at least that's my experience, yeah. Yeah. The sole exception are Tibetans, actually. Yeah. Well, I'm reasonably sort of, I need space. Yeah. If you ever try to be a monastic in a Tibetan monastery, you know that being big is not an advantage. Yeah, because you have a monk here and you have a monk here. Uh, yeah, that way. Yeah. For a Dutch person, that is way too much intimacy. Yeah. But anyway, so the point is, again, in the beginning of the visualization, to consider the qualities of the Buddha because they're informative about you. They tell you about your own Buddha nature. And when you reflect on whatever aspect you know of the Buddha, his compassion or his wisdom or whatever, the fact that you can relate to it, that you can make sense of it, shows you about the way your own compassion and your own wisdom relate to the Buddha. Yeah. And that is very important. So we can only make sense of the Buddha by way of ourselves, but he also allows us to make sense of who we are. And it creates like a natural tension. And that is what you need. That is what generates enthusiasm. And you can't wrestle your way to enlightenment. This is not going to work. What you would like to is that your enthusiasm about that relationship does that on its own accord. That's the only way you can meditate. That tension must do its own job without you having to force your way into nirvana. That is a self-defeating proposition. And so that is why these reflections on the qualities of the Buddha are so important, because that is also a reflection on you. Then we go a bit further. We make offerings. And that is simply, on the one hand, a practice of generosity, but I must say it is also a wonderful practice of creativity. It is a space in which you can be as elaborate as humanly possible. There's much again here to be explored, but one of the things very important here is that in most of our hands, objects and things of this world are used to, well, serve us in unfortunate ways. We tend to collect them, put them on big heaps, and then protect our own little heap, or our Silicon Valley, what am I saying, our very big heap. But on the other hand, Buddhas use things only to care for others. So whatever is given to the Buddha is given to serve all living beings. And so to play with that. That is why I combined the visualization of these objects, these phenomena that you offer, together with your mind. I find it's always a very useful practice to wrap, as it were, to use the substance of your own mind, to say it in that way, and to transform them into offerings that actually benefit others. Yeah. And play with it. See what it does to your lived awareness. Then there's something that is often translated as confession, which is, we should not do that. Yeah. And it's not like going to the priest and saying like, oh Lord, I've sinned, please give me some punishment so that I can feel better about myself afterwards again. That's not the point. And the Buddha purifies not with punishment, the Buddha purifies with emptiness. The past is not existent. We just drag the consequences around. The Buddha, by talking with the Buddha about it, as he's non-judgmental, so you can endlessly talk about it, he knows, he probably tried all of that himself, is very relieving. It's a very good psychological function. And then he benefits us by saying, look at it. These things are empty. These things belong to the past. We carry them around. And carrying them around produces the opposite effect of what you would want to. It makes us into victims of the past. And what we would like to be is to be responsible of the future. And these two things do not go well together. And to have that sense when you mention it to him, when you put it in front of him, that you are free from it. You can let go. On the other hand, both with regard to ourselves and with regard to others, our negative bias makes spiritual practice look pretty unrealistic. And we focus so much on the negative. And then when you look at that endless self-story that we tell, like, that is not really promising. But we do the same thing to others as well. So when we think about our own liberation, sometimes it's things that you feels like with such a person as me, I mean, where shall I start? And then the Buddha comes, well, you should do that for all living beings as well. And you think like, yeah. But that burden comes only from our own side. In fact, we could drop everything. If we would know it, we could drop it like this. We just believe in a world that doesn't exist. And so the next aspect of that prayer, of that practice is rejoicing, is to actively tell a different story. Like all living beings are in fact marked mostly by doing good things. Every living being is important to someone else. Our own worst enemy, if you would look at that person from a different perspective, you would love him or her because that person would be important to you. That person would have done things for you that are essential to you. And that gives a very different perspective on who these beings are, that all of them, and not only Black lives, all life matters for someone. And that is a very important view to have because that makes your mind look at the world in a way that makes enlightenment believable. Like beings are already quite exquisite. Now we just need to take something of that burden away. The rest will come. It's actually easier than we think. That is a hopeful proposition. We need that. The last two are always formulated as sort of like a question to the Buddha. And I always think that is wrongly formulated, but that's my personal opinion about things. But I would like to explain it nevertheless in that way because I think an active dialogue with the tradition is very valid. Things were expressed in a certain ways, hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. The problem with all language use is that if you do the same thing too much, you risk always losing the meaning. So it can be worthwhile to question stuff like, does it actually really mean what I believe that sentence means? Yeah. And when you say, well, no, may the Buddha or my teacher, may my guru remain, then in a way, from the perspective of the enlightened mind, that sentence makes no sense. No, it's not that Buddhas come and go, that he sometimes withdraws his omniscience from you and then sometimes sheds his light back on you. That the problem is from our side. On the other hand, the Buddha might be sitting in front of us and we might not be aware at all, or we might completely forget about him. Because let's be honest, our mind have great difficulty attending to anything at all. And so the Buddha might be sitting here like explaining you exactly how to get to nirvana, but we will be busy with our shopping list and whatever you have. So in reality, this prayer is about us. It's not about whether or not the Buddha stays with us. It's if we can stay with him or her, for that matter. And I often rephrase that verse in the text stating like, may I remain mindful of you. You're already here, but I am not. And to keep saying that to myself, like, whether or not the guru remains in the world for 10 or 1,000 years, but if I'm forgetful of his presence, it doesn't matter. It's completely inconsequential. Whether or not the Dalai Lama dies tomorrow or becomes 130, if I never think of him, his presence doesn't matter. It's superfluous. And so I need to be able to think, to be aware of his presence in a constant way that is informative to my behavior, to my path, to my sense of well-being. And of course, a simple practice is helpful, but simply looking at things, staring at things is not enough. Yeah. We need the tools to understand what he is, or she is. And so, again, teachers might teach endlessly, but that might be completely, as the Bible calls it, that might be pearls to the swine. All these beautiful, and we're sitting there like, how long? I mean, I have other appointments. Can you hurry up with your Guya Samaya commentary, please? So when that is our attitude, then the Dharma might come our way, but we can't hold it, we can't take it, we can't integrate it, we can't make it ours. That's what we want, is to generate that wish, like, may I keep attending to it? May that be, whatever I do, may it be informed by that. May it permeate my life. And then had that final visualization, to keep it as simple as possible, is then for a moment had to dissolve the Buddha in us, for a moment to try to sense what it would be like to be like him, to be an enlightened being. And for a moment, a sense of awareness that is without boundaries, that is without oppression. There's nothing weighing down on it. That is silent and kind. That we are encouraged by our own growing experience at the end of such a practice. Yeah. And that is a good ground then to do Mahāmudrā meditation. Does that make some sense? Online, does that make online great sense? A great sense, well, good sense would be a good starter. Yeah. Good. Then we take a 10-minute break. See, I remembered. That's the only Dharma that I have great difficulty remembering.